Well, hello, and welcome to ICRC-TV COVID-19 HR updates. I'm glad you came back for us. Things have really slowed down. Things aren't nearly changing as much as they were, and yet we still feel like we've got some things we need to share with you. So we're really glad you stopped by. Today's show is going to talk a little bit more on the legality side of what's going behind the scenes of much of the labor law. And there's two big topics right now that we really wanted to kind of talk about. One of our speakers is one that has come back. I'm just so excited because I try every way to get Carl on this show. Carl Ulrich's and I love this title, OSBA Specialist in Labor and Employment for Sibley, Shillitoe, and Dyer here in the Cincinnati market. Carl and I have been working together for years. And he's going to come on the show today and talk to us about the legalities around teleworking. Now, it's not a new topic on the show. I get it. But Carl's going to help clarify some of that. He's also going to touch a little bit more on the clarity of what are actual expenses right now. We've got all these remote workers. What is the obligation of an employer under these guidelines? And what are we supposed to be, or what are we required to do in regards to timekeeping? Remote work is not going to go away. So this is going to be a good segment for you, and I want you to take some good notes on that. Then we've got Steve Tracy. Now, Steve's going to bring in a brand new segment for the show. I have not, it has not amazed me, but I have not stopped getting comments in regards to employment under the pandemic. It's a serious issue for everybody. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care what type of skill set you're using or what you might be looking for. It's a major concern. We've got to get the economy back, and we've got to get everybody back to work. Well, At Work Personnel has just opened up a second office here in the Cincinnati market, one in Northern Kentucky, and Steve is actually their branch manager. He's going to start this new segment out on the show today for us in regards to what jobs actually are out here in the Cincinnati market and the tri-state area. And better yet, what type of talent might we be able to access if you're an employer looking for someone? So we're anxious to see how Steve does with this new segment. He's setting the pace for us. And then as a brand new presenter, I invited Faith Whitaker in, partner with Dinsmore. I read one of her papers on blower claims. Now, we had talked about this a couple of shows ago. It was inevitable, right? Employees were going to start getting a little nervous about things, and employers were going to get a little tense about things, and it was bound to happen. We were going to get all sorts of claims, whether it was discrimination, retaliation, and it's going to break those down for you. This is going to be a good segment because we really haven't touched on this topic. And then she's going to pull us into how this is affecting some of the OSHA record keeping. Because I talked to a client just the other day, and they totally forgot they needed to be doing their 300 report. So they had a good paper. I'm sure she's going to have a good presentation. So let's get started. My name is Candy Pridemore, Principal Consultant with the Human Resource USA. And Faith, talk to me about whistleblower claims. Hello, Faith. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Sorry, Pandy, I thought you were starting with Carl, so I'm excited to start. And thank you for, again, it's a hot topic. We're always dealing with something new in COVID. In fact, I was just telling you that since the last time we talked, the OSHA has updated its guidance on recording. So it's constantly trying to change. But I think when you and I originally talked about me coming on is to talk about how we've seen such an increase in the OSHA complaints, whistleblower complaints. And sometimes we have clients who are thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me. Why does this matter for OSHA? And so, I wanted to talk a little bit about just how it applies and why employers should be thinking about trying to provide this safe working environment and comply with OSHA. A lot of people maybe don't know, but there's this general duty clause for employers to provide a safe working environment, to recognize hazards, which COVID-19 is now one of the recognized hazards that's creeping into the workplace and is in the workplace. And so, it's important that we're trying to protect employees in that way. And OSHA has given several different has put out several different things on guidance for how to comply. And a lot of times they rely heavily on the CDC and then of course local health orders. But it's the same things we sort of keep hearing, I think, since the start of this. Have a policy in place. Train your employees on that policy. Implement social distancing. Implement sanitation measures. You know, we've all heard this before, but it's important to think of it in this regard. Well, now we need to defend potentially against an OSHA complaint. And they have very limited time in which they can investigate these complaints. So it's very fast paced, and we want to be prepared and have all of our ducks in a row to be able to defend if that case, of course, happens. We don't want it to happen, but the return to work plan should be all encompassing. Again, we talk about, okay, what should we do with flexibility of absences and leaves? And I know Carl will start talking about that probably a little bit on teleworking. But it should also address all the different measures that we're putting into place to protect employees, keeping distance, maybe having a maximum amount of people in different rooms. I think another thing that people don't think about, or maybe employers should, and certainly should, is an avenue in which employees can bring complaint, and maybe even anonymously. So having somewhere they can go, multiple avenues where they can go, and even somewhere where they don't have to be identified if they're making a safety complaint or otherwise. And then making sure that there's an anti-retaliation piece of it, because we don't want employees to be retaliated against or have an adverse action if they are making a complaint. I always tell our clients, you know, if we don't know what's wrong, we can't fix it. So it's the same thing. We'd rather know if there's some issue or if an employee has a complaint, so that way we can do something about it perhaps. And so having those protocols, and then making sure employees understand these protocols we're doing, you know, not just sending an email, here's our updated policy, but having a call, having a meeting. I'm trying to go over it best we can so that they understand, and particularly management needs to be able to understand what our policy is. Of course, that policy might change next week. And so we need to be, you know, having someone designated on maintaining and updating what is going on with COVID and how we can comply further to keep employees safe. So those are some of the big key things to try to prevent OSHA claims and keep a safe working environment. As I mentioned, OSHA just updated their guidance on when to record, whether or not really the inquiry becomes if it's work related. And that's hard to know. I mean, you have a lot of responses of you could get it at the grocery store, you could get it somewhere. How do we know where if it's from work? And OSHA is really wanting a reasonableness inquiry. So they want employers, of course, respecting employees' privacy as best they can, but to at least make a reasonable inquiry. Okay, where were you where have you been? You know, where have you been around anyone else infected? Where else did you go outside of work? Again, respecting employees' privacy. So OSHA is talking about the reasonableness of getting into the inquiry. And then, of course, reviewing the work environment. Who is this person talking to? Are they exposed to the public often? The other piece is just weighing the evidence available to the employer. OSHA even gives an example that if multiple employees test positive for COVID-19, it's more likely than not that it is probably work related, versus if this one employee tests positive and they've been around someone else in their family who has also tested positive in a close relationship, and no one else at work ends up testing positive, then it most likely isn't work related. So just making those assessments as you're going through are just some of the things to think about.
That's a really good point. I want to kind of break that down a little bit, because I get comments or questions every so often that say, look, we know that this person's been exposed. How far do I have to go, or what's my responsibility as the employer to do contact tracing? So would you mind kind of running through a comfortable or an appropriate conversation or discussion an employer should have with an employee or a set of employees in regards to contact tracing?
And that's a great question. And that's sort of where a lot of our clients struggle, is because they don't want to pry into someone's personal information. But at the same time, we need to make sure we prevent the spread further. And so it's perfectly acceptable to talk to and interview. And in fact, we want to interview the person who tests positive and make a reasonable inquiry, again, into where they've been in the last, probably couple weeks, and who they've been in close contact with at work, and that's within 6 feet for longer than 15 minutes, is the most updated close contact. And then also, have they been exposed anywhere else that they can be aware of? Those inquiries are completely fine. What we're recommending too is for employers who have an employee who's tested positive, that they reach out to the local health department. And a lot of times the local health department will walk them through who else they need to talk to, and they might even sort of take the reins on the contact tracing for them. But there's nothing wrong with letting the health department know we've got a positive case. We're just trying to make sure that we prevent the spread, because that's been one of the complaints or concerns that I've gotten from some of our clients is, well, that's their private information. How can we tell the local health department that this person tested positive? And it's absolutely fine under these circumstances.
Mike Samet was on the show here a couple weeks ago from the Hamilton County Health Department. He said that they get 30 to 70 calls a day, 30 to 70 a day, and it is their responsibility to actually research, investigate each one of those. But I try to tell my employers, and I'm sure you're telling them that yours the same way, look, this doesn't mean that they're going to come in and fine you. That means that they just have the legal obligation to follow through to find out the validity and if there's any chance the health department can help that employer. So I love your comment in regards to employees having access or a method by which to communicate their concerns. If they do it with their employer first, they won't be likely to go to the health department.
Yes. I mean, I think the other thing too is making sure that the other employees are protected. So once we find out that this person who was positive has been around, let's say 4 other people, we need to make sure those 4 other people know. We need to make sure they're quarantined or seeing a healthcare provider or doing what they need to do. And so I know there's a lot of questions about how can we do that? Well, that's how I best do it. And then also it may make sense, depending on the size of the business, depending on what the customers look like and how close in contact they are. You may want to also have a general message saying, hey, we've had a recent positive test. Here's what we're doing. And so it goes beyond just that employee and then those in close contact. It may reach, even the vendors and customers.
Yeah, I was reading this morning that there's some guidance now in Colorado requiring just that transparency and notices to employees. So it's going to go that direction. We've seen this. You and I talked on the phone about relating this conversation to the decision that Governor DeWine just offered the state of Ohio. And we're not the first state. There are multiple states that preceded us. But please reassure our employers with that information.
Yes, so Ohio just passed a law, and among others, as you mentioned, other states have done this, providing immunity to civil claims related to COVID exposure and transmission for death, loss of property, or injury. What Ohio's law, how it stands out though, is in a couple different ways. It provides this immunity unless the plaintiff can prove recklessness, intentional, willful, or wanton misconduct. But how that's defined is very strict. It's defined as, with heedless indifference to the consequences, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the person's conduct is likely to cause an exposure. So to me, that's a very high standard to be able to prove. And this extends all the way through September 2021. The other way the Ohio statute or law stands out is it's ubiquitous in coverage. So it essentially applies to everybody and provides protection. It provides protection to individuals, businesses, healthcare providers, property owners, nonprofits, governmental entities, churches, and schools. Those are just some of the things that I think are interesting about the statute. The other piece is that it basically says that the healthcare or the local health orders and guidance is not to be used as a standard of care under this law. So for negligent sort of claims, it's significant. Of course, with this law, I know a lot of our clients are thinking, well, great, we have this immunity statute, so we're pretty good right now. But we just talked about OSHA, right? So that's still in play. So remember the general duty to provide a safe work environment. among Family Medical Leave Act, Americans with Disabilities Act, the FFCRA. Those are still going to be around in other laws. But so I would say this is a very important statute in the sense that it provides protection, but it doesn't mean that we just have to throw out the booklet on guidance and trying to protect employees by following what OSHA's saying and CDC and local health orders. Because ultimately, too, employers want employees to work. We want them to be safe. Employees want to come to work, and we all want to earn a living, and we want to go forward with operations. So to try to keep these measures in place is important to do that.
Well, and we've been talking for the last few shows about how much COVID fatigue we are hearing now in the workplace. I literally have companies that look at me and go, don't even say the word. I don't want to hear it. I'm done. I walk into a facility, I'm wearing my mask. No one is wearing the mask. And, I can only say so much, but companies and employers, employees, everybody, we're tired of all of this, but yet we can't ignore the reality that it still exists. And OSHA is going to be overseeing a lot of what goes on, and the claims aren't going to stop. I mean, they're just not. Do you know what the percentage is? I mean, I was reading some various numbers, 30 to 40% the claims are up right now.
For COVID-related claims?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the other thing, yes, we're seeing, I don't have a specific stat right this second because I know it's changing.
Yeah.
But it's not just even in the OSHA related type of complaints, but the COVID complaints have come in different forms. So discrimination based on reductions in force sometimes will be counted as a COVID related claim, or Americans with Disabilities Act type of claims related to COVID because I didn't want to come back to work because of this health condition. So definitely a rise, and it's sort of all encompassing in those facts. We're going to see some Families First Coronavirus Response Act leave issues, I would think, coming pretty soon if we haven't already.
Yeah, it's not going to go away. It's not going to go away. And the sad part is I love the fact that you touched on, I really like the fact that you touched on that there needs to be a method of communication. We have emphasized on this show over and over and over again the importance of just talking with your employees. Find out what's going on. Talk to them about how they're feeling. Deal with their fears. Deal with their apprehensions, the anxieties. Help them understand you're trying to provide them with a safe and secure workplace as their employer. But if even the anonymous method by which you recommended, I know some of my clients, some of the work they do with ethical trade, have to have an outside anonymous source for employees to be able to communicate issues and concerns of all sorts. So this is a brilliant idea, and we have not talked about it on the show, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because even if it means it goes to a PO box or an info email of some sort, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of giving your employees an opportunity to speak freely. If they don't feel safe physically, at least give them the opportunity to voice their opinions. And retaliation can get very grave sometimes. I think that's a really good training tip on the show. And I'm going to kind of interrupt here a little bit, because on the show we try to give our viewers training tips for their workforce. That would be a great training tip, is teach your supervisors, your frontline management, how to react to questions, concerns, comments that don't appear to be retaliating against them, and have it open, teach them open dialogue and communication. Thank you. And is there anything I forgot, Faith? Anything else you want to add, Faith?
Not at this time, unless you want me to talk a little bit about what we're talking about on the gig and contractors for 1099s, or do you want to save that for another?
No, we can tap into that. Carl, you and I talked a little bit about that, so let's just have an open dialogue on this. As we're looking at the employment aspect of it, we do have a lot of people that are working remotely, but we're also identifying that some businesses are finding out that they need individuals to work in areas of their company that never seem to do well. It wasn't, I mean, I had one client, which I mentioned on the show once before, they had a phenomenal business. All of a sudden it just completely stopped. And as you know, in the lull of April, May, June, all of a sudden their e-commerce side absolutely exploded. They increased by 400%. And though they had furloughed, 40 people worldwide, I get a call and they're going, we had no idea. Now we're looking for a whole entirely different talent base. We can't bring back any of the other people that we furloughed because they don't have these skill sets and competence. What are we supposed to do here? It's like hire. I mean, this is phenomenal, but they instantly want to go to 1099s and gig workers. So let's go ahead, Faith, take that reign on that one.
So the DOL recently proposed a new rule that would sort of synthesize how we're going to interpret whether someone's an independent contractor or an employee for purposes of the Fair Labor Standards Act. And there's factors, as we always have had with this, but they sort of consolidate it into, and they say there's two big factors that they look at. It's the nature and degree of the individual's control over the work. So do they control their schedule? How do they manage what they're doing, picking their projects? Can they work for other companies at the same time? And that even includes competing businesses, which is going to lend itself more to an independent contractor. The other big factor they talk about that they're going to emphasize is the individual's opportunity for profit or loss. So how much can they earn from this initiative? And they even talk about how if the worker's only able to have a positive effect on earning by working more hours or more efficiently, then they're more likely an employee. And then there's other factors such as the skill required for the work, the permanence of the working relationship. So if someone's there for multiple years, they're most likely not a contractor. And then also the whether the work is part of the production. Those are just the factors that they've identified. This is the proposed rule, but it's something that we can start anticipating. This is the direction the DOL is going to go. And we don't know what the final rule will look like, but this is what we're seeing now.
And this is information that our viewers need to hear now. Carl, you worked with one of my clients on a case where 1099s were misclassified, and that was a horrendous situation. Refresh my memory. There were over 30 actual individuals impacted on that one.
Well, in situations like that, you had individuals who were essentially misclassified. And I think the challenge in those situations is really to be able to understand the distinction between someone who is, to Faith's point, who's essentially working as a job shop or as a project person versus someone who's got an ongoing relationship with an employer. And so the misclassification became an issue for wage and hour purposes. Certainly overtime became an issue. Unpaid overtime for people who were classified as independent contractors, but who were actually employees and working extra hours. But it was also an issue for workers' compensation coverage, for unemployment compensation coverage, for a variety of other compliance issues that came from that misclassification. So it became kind of a cascade of legal issues that arose from that initial misclassification. So I think it's really important for employers to get it right on the classification side on the front end, and that essential test, that direction and control test is part of it, but it's a lot of other things besides. So I think walking through those factors that Faith mentioned is really key to that. But getting it wrong can be a significant problem.
Well, and I think you both will agree with me that employers think that it's just an easy, I'm just going to have this person do this job for a while and I'll just pay them 1099. It's not that easy. And Carl, you and I have talked about this on another show that you and I do. There's some very strong legal parameters and language that needs to be associated with an independent contractor or a gig worker, and that's the independent contractor agreement. And even a statement of work is something that I absolutely insist on with my clients. And this is a legal document. I don't care whether you plan on having this person do one project or 15 projects for your organization. You need to have this language drawn up for you specific to your particular company and your particular entity. And as much as I would love to promote, the consultants of the world, I can't in this situation. This is a document and this is information that has to come from a Faith or a Carl. It has to come from an attorney who understands the legalities of your location and what you're trying to accomplish. And this is not something one of my clients tried to pull language off the internet the other day, and she sent it to me and she goes, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And I was like, "Oof, yeah, no." So real quick, no, you don't pull any of this kind of stuff off the internet. And Carl, I mean, let's go back to what about general liability insurance? I mean, it goes beyond just workers' comp employment. They need to, are they insuring for accidents on your property? Again, even if they're only there for one project, you need to have this stuff in place.
Well, when you hire a contractor to come and do remodeling on your home, for example, one of the questions you ask is whether they're bonded, whether they have insurance covered in case somebody gets hurt. It's a whole different liability equation when you've got somebody providing a service to you under contract versus when you've got somebody employed by you in an ongoing employment relationship. The liability equation is very different. So you think of it for independent contractor purposes. Obviously, you think of it as a business relationship, as a business contract, as two businesses negotiating and dealing at arm's length with one another. An employment relationship is very different from that. And so the liabilities and the risk prevention measures that you take are very different. And the other thing I'd say about an independent contractor agreement is it's extremely important to have one if you really want to be able to justify your independent contractor relationship, your classification that you've made. But at the end of the day, what it really comes down to, even the best agreement isn't going to save you if the fundamental relationship between the parties looks, feels, and smells more like employment. If the person is being directed and controlled by the entity, by the assigner of the work, if that person is being asked to work certain hours and they're being provided with a schedule and assigned specific assignments on a day-to-day basis, that's an employment relationship, whether you've got a contract signed by both parties saying the words independent contractor or not. The regulators are going to look at the essential reality of the relationship. The document's going to help you only as secondary evidence and as support for what's already there. So again, that the test that Faith mentioned is really the starting point for any proper classification here.
Thank you. They've heard it a million times. No working interviews. Don't start somebody on a 1099 and say, "Well, I just want to try them out for a while." It's as Carl said, that's not gonna work. Faith, do you have a problem with the college kids during the summer coming in and working on a 1099 basis?
I haven't had that issue come up too much. I really think it's a matter of the gig workers and that sort of the newer things that come up. The new jobs that didn't exist before have been sort of the new things that we've seen. And of course, it depends really on each situation and how much control they have and what the relationship is. And so it's hard to give, of course, that bright line rule. We use those factors. But yeah, we haven't had too much of an issue with the college. A lot of at least our clients, when anything's come up, they've gotten sort of smarter maybe, and they've figured out, okay, we might as well just make them an employee as opposed to pay them by the hour and track it as if we would. But as far as the gig workers, I think that's going to be an interesting thing going forward.
Absolutely. So, and let's think about it. Gig workers are right now, that just opened up the entire country. Since we have everybody working remotely, we can bring people in that we never would have thought of bringing in. We can tap into talent and competencies that we just never thought were available because they weren't here in our backyard. So what Carl, can you move us, just kind of drive us right into the whole guidance of teleworking? What do we need to learn now about teleworking under the pandemic?
Well, I start by talking about teleworking as a new phenomenon. It really isn't. It's been around a long time. But what's new, I think, is that we're seeing a new normal here. I saw a study recently about teleworking. They said before the pandemic, about 12% of employees worked remotely, at least part-time. 12% of employees. And I don't know if that's administrative employees or what category that is, but the study said 12%. Comparison to post-pandemic, the estimate is that it'll be up to 30% on an ongoing basis going forward. So in other words, what we're seeing is kind of a realignment to some degree of certain work location assumptions, certain work location arrangements. Those are going to be changing and stay changed, I think, as a result of the pandemic. So the question really becomes, how do employers embrace that new reality? How do they do it in a way that doesn't get them or their employees in trouble? And I think what employers in particular need to be thinking about are really three things, in my view, when it comes to remote work arrangements. The first thing is making sure that they're paying people appropriately, that they're paying especially non-exempt employees for all the work that they're performing, and that they're addressing overtime issues, either regulating it or paying it when appropriate and necessary. So the pay arrangements are critical. And with the pay arrangements, I think the second issue I would be concerned about as an employer of remote workers would be, how do I supervise productivity and performance? Somebody isn't physically present. It's not easy to watch them working. It isn't easy to see how diligent and how consistent they are in doing their job. So how do you monitor an employee's performance and productivity? And then finally, for those employers in specific types of industries where proprietary information or trade secret information, where confidential materials are very important to doing a particular job, and that person or that employee is working remotely, how do they implement procedures to protect confidentiality and to make sure that the same levels of security are available for the employee working remotely as would be available for the systems in a centralized work environment? So those kinds of things are key factors. There are many others besides, but those are the three main things that I think about. And I think we can talk a little bit about the pay issues. One of the things, Pandy, I think you mentioned before we got started here was, we forget sometimes that when you work remotely, you have some costs that you wouldn't normally have as an employee working from the office. What does the employer have to provide? What should they provide? That's a very interesting question for most employers to address. They haven't really been thinking about that. The law doesn't really provide us with a whole lot of guidance there. The federal law doesn't say you must reimburse employees for working remotely for internet access or for a computer that allows you to video conference daily. There's no federal law that says that. There are certain restrictions on what person needs to be paid minimum wage, of course. But so sometimes, depending on what state you happen to be in, you may have some state regulations to consider. Ohio, we don't have anything here in Ohio, again, that requires expense reimbursement for remote officing. So the employer does need to consider what things they are willing to furnish for the remote officing employee, for the remote worker. And what expenses they're going to reimburse. Things like, cell phones. A lot of employers already do that. They furnish cell phones, or they reimburse for online services. Internet access, home office supplies, copy paper, printer cartridges, things like that. A computer laptop that may be a little more robust than the typical thing somebody might be using at home. Another question: if I'm working remotely and I have to hop in the car and go to a centralized office for a meeting, do I get reimbursed for the time that I spend in the car driving from my remote office to the centralized office? Is that compensable time, or is that something that would be like a commute to the office in the morning and away from that? Usually, if you're moving from office to office within the context of a single workday, that's compensable time. The employer could also reimburse for mileage, but the time is probably compensable, whereas a morning commute and an evening commute would not be. So those are the things to think about. But those are a lot of the common kinds of expenses that employers need to be thinking about reimbursing or providing for their remote employees. It can get expensive, and it can get expensive pretty quickly for a lot of people. So obviously, non-exempt employees have a little more flexibility on time, and they're not as beholden to a timesheet or I should say exempt employees are a little bit more flexible on time. They're not as beholden to a timesheet. Non-exempt employees track their time more closely, more specifically. So you do have a difference there. But I think with respect to compensation and expense reimbursement in particular, there's really one approach that seems to help a lot, and that is to remember communication is key. And I think if you set up a remote office arrangement with an employee, sitting down with that employee with some clear expectations about what the work hours are going to be, what productivity benchmarks are going to be met, setting that up in an agreement of some kind is useful, and we're using more and more frequently now. But communication is key. Getting the expectations aligned before the arrangement is already underway. I think that's critical to making it easier for both the employee and the employer to comply.
One of the biggest concerns I hear right now about teleworking is, well, I don't know what they're doing. And I think they went to, out to lunch with their family, or they did something in the middle of the day, or they weren't readily available. And I'm just really concerned. And I had one client who just absolutely insisted that he had the right to dock or expect that exempt worker to work over the weekend to make up his hours. So could you kind of briefly go over the whole flexible thing with the exempt workers?
Well, compensable time, the law doesn't change, right? Whether you're doing the work at home or you're doing the work in a centralized office, compensable time is still compensable time. And if you're a non-exempt employee paid by the hour, you track your time, and whether you are productive or not during those work hours, you get paid for that time. And if you are not as productive as the employer would like you to be, and the employer wants you to work over the weekend to make up for that project you didn't get done, you get paid for that time. And if it's any hour over 40 in the work week, you get paid overtime. Again, independent of productivity, it's a question of whether you are on the clock or not. And again, the location of the work doesn't matter. The rule is the same. You get paid your hourly rate for every hour that is compensable time, and time and a half for every hour in excess of 40 hours in a work week. And so the real, again, what I came back to what I said earlier, it's really about communication with the employee. And I think for most companies that are working with remote employees, keeping that line of communication open, I think having an understanding up front that your supervisor is going to be checking in on a regular basis with you remotely by video conference or telephone, having a once a week standing meeting where the supervisor and the remote worker get together and talk through what the remote worker is doing that week. You really build in that communication in a schedule in a much more deliberate way than you would normally do, I think, if you were working in a centralized office. The supervisor comes by, looks over your shoulder, how are things going, and moves on. You need to build in a better, more disciplined, more structured communication process when you're working with remote employees, particularly those who would benefit from more supervision. So again, communication and expectations set clearly up front when that arrangement begins is critical, I think, to the success of a remote office arrangement for anybody.
I love that. It's not going away. All right. It's not going away. We cannot count hours on exempt workers. So let's stay focused on productivity and communication. That was so well said. Thank you, Carl. Thank you very much. So, Steve, how do we get more workers into the workforce so that they can work remotely or that they can help us meet the needs? What do we have down there at Work Personnel?
Yeah, I think Faith said it best actually early on when she was talking about OSHA. But employers want people to work. They really do, especially as you were talking about with the develop of expansion of these e-commerce groups and even home deliveries. People are wanting to get to work. We're noticing a lot of clients out there looking for that growth added talent. We're noticing a lot of candidates out there looking just to get back into the workforce after having been either furloughed or off for such time. So yeah, as far as availabilities go, we have a ton of options. Mostly, I should clarify, we're really in the kind of light industrial, clerical, kind of janitorial production, manufacturing arena. So again, we don't have as much experience with the teleworking aspect as most of ours are kind of, warehouse and distribution. But again, we're seeing lots of clients even expanding during this time, trying to keep production up, despite the fact that, lots of people were home with COVID. So the way we've kind of seen that is offering incentives. We've had, a couple of our programs offering, attendance incentives to help people come into work. We've had a couple other clients that are offering, one's even offering a $3,000 bonus over the course of the year of employment with them as a way to really entice great talent to come in. So our goal is really, again, getting these candidates in and making sure that they have the marketable skill set that matches with what the clients want. So just to kind of discuss briefly, I guess, some opportunities that are out there, especially in the Cincy area. We did just expand to Northern Kentucky so we can kind of better serve the greater Cincinnati area. But we've got, a number of picking and packing positions in the Sharonville area. Again, going for great rates with those attendance incentives. They're kind of Monday through Friday opportunities. Again, they're really looking to make sure that when they come in, and this is something we're looking for as well, people are maintaining those protocols of safety with relation to protecting themselves against COVID. So that's one of our prior major factors when coming to that. We've got work in the Hamilton area with kind of machine operator positions where they're, mixing and polishing machines in manufacturing environments, janitorial positions in the Hamilton area as well. We have warehouse blending material positions in Westchester that are up in that $16, $17 an hour range for first shift and second shift, as well as some dock worker positions there as well. And then Northern Kentucky, we have a number of positions in the Covington area, specifically for picking and packing for second shift. And they also have an attendance incentive attached. So what we're noticing is, again, to get the talent and the candidacies they want, employers are doing what is necessary incentive-wise to really kind of pull those candidates in.
Absolutely fantastic. Now, what about any special talent? Do you have any special individuals that just kind of wooed you and said, oh gosh, why are you unemployed?
I gotta say, that's kind of the crazy thing. I mean, that's just the climate we're in right now. We have this wonderful woman who has a major background in production. She worked her way through a company all the way from assembly on into a production lead position where she was at for 7 to 8 years, actually. And again, due to COVID, was furloughed for a while and laid off. Just, again, a phenomenal woman with data entry background, operational management skills, just phenomenal in that field that's still, kind of looking for those lead positions that aren't as heavily or readily available right now. We have a machine operator who actually, she technically went on to kind of develop a skill in composite technology as well, and was working for some aviation companies. Same thing, due to the slowness that happened with COVID, she was kind of furloughed and been looking for a position since there, but extensive background in machine operations. And then finally, I mean, we have something that's often needed and sometimes go overlooked is a warehouse specialist. He's a great candidate with years of experience as a forklift driver and material handler. Kind of laid off for COVID and downsizing with his company. Just, a really positive guy looking to highlight his skills and stay busy. But again, looking for a place that can take that on. So.
And what do you require when they walk in the door? If they were to call you right now, Steve, do they have to have an resume, or do you have documentation that they can complete that would suffice?
We again, as far as what we try to do, our one key is accessibility. We want to be as accessible as possible to help them in a variety of ways and be adaptable. So we will, if they have a resume, that's fantastic. If they don't have a resume, what we will often do is bring them in again for a brief interview, talk about their skills. We'll kind of develop a resume with them, kind of a CV that they can utilize. And even if it isn't for a particular position that they came in for, it's something that we can at least leave them with as they continue in the job hunt.
Okay, all right. Where do you see things moving? Do you see this fourth quarter picking up? Obviously, it isn't going to pick up for retail, right?
Right.
See that holiday jobs, that everybody was looking for holiday jobs. This is going to be the first year where the malls aren't going to be just absolutely.
Right.
What do you see coming down the road for fourth quarter?
That's a great question. I wish I had a magic ball that could help me with that. But I'm hoping for continued improvement again as we continue to work with a variety of clients. They continue to add more orders on, looking for more candidates and more talent to fill those positions. So again, I'm hoping as we continue into fourth quarter, there will be some development, despite the fact that retail and others will be kind of missing that side of staffing.
Yeah, and I could just tell you love what you do. Thank you so much for coming in here. How can they get a hold of you, Steve?
Oh yeah, so I don't know if it would be helpful just to have the sign up. If this would be most helpful for you. It looks backwards to me, but I've got my info on there. I know this is super fancy. So there's my cell phone on there as well, my email. And then there's Emily Campbell is our recruiter out here in the Cincinnati office. So there is her information as well. And for anyone, again, looking just for our job opportunities that weren't mentioned, we have a whole bunch more than I didn't talk about there. They're at our website, atworkcincy.com. Again, feel free to go through peruse and give us a call.
And they don't have to live in Northern Kentucky to contact you.
No, they don't. No, yeah, we've placed people from Cincy in Northern Kentucky and vice versa. So that's kind of the beauty of being so close to the river there. So.
I love it. Thank you so much for launching this part of our show. We're going to try to focus on employment moving forward. And
I love it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's do a recap. Again, a lot of information, hopefully a lot of solutions for you. If nothing else, hopefully this show has put some major thought or conversation points to talk. Let's go back over our training tip. The first training tip that we came up with for the show was obviously get in front of your supervisors. We've talked about this over and over again. Even if they're remote, talk to your supervisors about the type of communication that they're having with their staff and their teams. Retaliation is something that it will sneak in and strangle you. And as Faith was trying to say, there are situations that can come up that people are uncomfortable having conversations and can feel a little defensive in regards to this pandemic. So I highly recommend that you get with your team and train in that regards. But let's go back to what Carl was talking about in terms of teleworking. I'm going to give you another training tip around expectations. I would recommend that you go back and make absolutely sure that supervisors and your management team truly understand what expectations are and how to communicate those to your remote workers and your teleworkers. I mean, if they don't know what's expected, then how can you be accountable? And guys, don't forget to hold your supervisors and your management team accountable. One of my clients here recently found that the supervisor wasn't watching the timekeeping. And they were doctoring, the employees were putting too many hours in on the books, and they were getting paid. For months, they were getting paid more than they were actually working. Well, that's the supervisor's responsibility. So not only do the employees need to be reprimanded, the supervisor should have been. Training tip, work with your supervisors and your management team. They control more of what goes on in your company than you realize. So please work on that. Faith, I want to go back to something that you said in regards to your segment in regards to policies. You made a very good point. There are policies that need to be written and established within the company in regards to the pandemic. And Carl, you and I have talked about this on our other show a number of times. You know, if it's written, you have to follow it. If it's not written, nobody follows anything. But under the pandemic, these policies that you establish and that Faith is recommending, if they're pandemic oriented, they don't necessarily have to go into your handbook. So please don't avoid putting policies in place thinking that you have to completely upheaval your handbook. Policies that you can just post and communicate and follow outside of the handbook. So be very careful about, again, avoiding studying new policies, overflowing with rules and regulations. Sometimes rules and regulations can really save you the risk and liability of not having them. So go back over Faith's storyline there and her presentation, because there are some very good points about some policies that would be very helpful for you. I also want to remind everybody that the FFCRA program has not gone away. Guys, I know you're getting tired of this whole, do I have COVID or do I not have COVID? I want to go into quarantine. I don't think I need to go into quarantine. But those programs are still in place till December 31st of this year. They're meant to give you a cushion and your employees a cushion if they think they've been exposed or they test positive. Please go back over those. Remember, you've got your poster that should be up, the employees' rights. Review that with your management team. I'm coming up now against some feedback that, well, you know, they're just faking it and we're going to make them use their PTO. No, you have to stick to the FFCRA programs. If you have any questions about that, please get to your consultant or talk to your labor law attorney. Because again, those kind of mistakes are where those claims come from that Faith was trying to talk to you about. So you don't want to make those kind of mistakes. What can I say? Carl, it's always so good to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else that you'd like to remind the viewers?
Thanks for having me, Pandy. No, I think it was a great wrap up. Thanks.
Thank you. And Steve, you know what? I hope to have you back with even more jobs. Maybe you can tell us how many people actually found jobs or how many jobs you found versus those experts on the next show. We'd love that.
That'd be great. Thank you so much for the time today. Appreciate it.
You are very welcome. And Faith, keep us posted. Would you please let us know if there's another topic that you're going to write a paper on? I don't want to miss it. I enjoyed that one, and I'm really glad that I saw it so that it could connect us. Dinsmore has a great reputation in town, and I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thanks so much, Pandy. Thanks for having me, and I will keep you posted. Maybe you don't even want to hear from me, but I'll send you little tidbits here and now.
I'm easy to work with. Carl will vouch for that. We want to thank ICRC for one more hour. You know, things have slowed down, but there is great information that you definitely want to hear, especially from experts like this. I mean, I will continue to try to bring in this quality of presenters all the way through. The station has decided, because things have slowed down, we're going to go to 2 shows a month. So our next show won't be until October 20th. But again, keep your questions coming. All the topics that we have on this show, or all of our presenters, have all been because of recommendations or questions or comments from viewers like yours. And I, again, want to thank my viewers out of state, because you guys have been really good in terms of giving me feedback, and we really appreciate it. My last comment is because of them. Remember, and Carl brought it up a little bit in his segment, remember, if you have employees in multiple states, even though your location may be here in the tri-state, if you have employees in multiple states, you must be aware of what's going on in those particular states. You must understand that those laws are changing just as quickly as the federal laws are. So please make sure that you're abiding by the state laws and not just trying to hold everybody to Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, because trust me, it's much different in states like Colorado, New York, or California, and it's changing by the minute. So again, thank you so much for watching us today. We really hope you'll see us here in 2 weeks. My name is Candy Bright, and thank you for coming.